All right. Welcome to Das One Hunt. I'm Zhao Pierre Ruth for Information Week. And in this episode, we're taking a look at what cybersecurity guardrails do CIOs and CISOs want for AI. With more AI models emerging, there's a lot of activity out there. How do CIOs and CISOs at end user enterprise go about establishing security guardrails to reduce risk as a technology gets deployed? In this episode, we're joined by Carl Froggett, CIO for Deep Instinct, Rob Lee, Chief of Research at SANS Institute, and Mike Levin, CISO and GC at Solera Health. All of you, thank you so much for being here today.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, Carl. So in the early months of the AI craze, we definitely saw incidents where proprietary code got into the wild after being fed to AI, and there have been concerns about AI also being tapped to launch cyber attacks. As a CIO or CISO, what are top risks, internal, external, are you concerned about when it comes to AI?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of risks, and we could have an entire very lengthy podcast on the risks. But as the CIO and CISO, as the CIO, I want to enable the business strategy, so I don't want to get in the way. As the CISO, I need to manage the risks, and really, I break those down into kind of two elements from a risk perspective: the cyber risk to the company, and then the business risks. Right, so as I think through what my business is doing in the adoption of AI, one is just the sheer volume of the different models, both internal on-prem, hosted, and then partly the integration into SaaS and other services that our vendors are doing. So the risk kind of landscape is pretty mixed, but for the audience here, my primary concern in the cyberspace, if I'm thinking of cyber risk to the company, is really around data loss and the control of data, especially when they're hosted and obviously in third parties. Because honestly, in my 30 years of doing cyber, I still feel we don't have good technology controls around data management and where data is and how it's been utilized. And AI really brings that to the fore. From a cyber perspective, obviously, we've seen the misinformation, deep fakes, the call center, robocalling it's just all so much more sophisticated today. And more importantly, it's very targeted and it's unique because that's what the bad actors, kind of powered by AI are able to do. So it's having much more of an effect. I recall last year, and it seemed quite incredible to me at the time, but it was confirmed to be true, around a Zoom deep fake where the CFO and deep fake audio and images were used to fool an employee to move $25 million into a bad actor's account. That was last year. So we only see the proliferation of those kind of things continuing from the employee perspective. And then the attacks and malware, definitely more of my area, but, we're seeing both, dark AI, as it's now called, for malware, for phishing, for robocalling, call center. And everything is now a 0 day. So 0 day malware, 0 day threats. So our existing kind of controls are not very good or not sophisticated enough when it comes to that sophistication from AI. On the business side, the risks are really around a few things. The lack of transparency in how these models arrive at their decisions, certainly coming from the financial space, that loss of control where we have make a checker and it was very deterministic at how something was done in making decisions. That's a big one. Obviously, I talked about the integration into third parties and how your data has been used is a big one. And then overall, the usual things that we've talked about AI for a long time, the bias, the discrimination, and the loss of control and the lack of transparency in how these models work within the business. And then finally, just as the CEO, is just the sheer volume, right? Not only of the popular models, but of the constant updates and everything that's going on. It's a very challenging environment for a CIO and a CISO.
Gotcha. I appreciate your thoughts on that. All right, Mike. Is your organization juggling multiple AI models, or thoughts on what organizations might consider, if they are in that kind of situation? Are you using different models for separate functions and needs within the organization?
We are. We've implemented a AI governance basically framework that actively monitors the usage of models as well as various capabilities inside the organization. The initial approach that we tried to utilize was a registry, but that requires a lot of self-reporting, and folks are terrible at that. So you end up having to move towards a active policing, and you just have to assume that folks are trying to get their job done. Folks aren't actually doing this maliciously. They're not trying to leak information. They're just unaware. It's an evolution beyond like DLP. It's actually like knowledge management. You basically have to focus on that. I operate in healthcare, which means we face a lot of stringent legal requirements, and a lot of our payers that we work with. It's very obvious to see in the contracts that there's a lot of anxiety around data loss from AI and models. I came from a large healthcare company initially, and when ChatGPT first came out, watching the knee-jerk reaction of the attorneys and other parts of the organization responding to the fear of, oh no, we're going to lose our data, we're going to lose our data. And it's true, there is a risk related to that, but you have to basically balance that among basically ability to actually impact and compete and basically increase efficiency and basically utilize it. So the way that we do it is through policing. We look for unauthorized AI. We look for basically, we identify very quickly. We focus upon individual responsibility. So we make each of our developers and employees essentially sign an affidavit that they understand before they are allowed to actually utilize all this. Because at the end of the day, they have to be watching out for themselves. You can't be always looking over their shoulder. And every now and then you have to make an example.
Gotcha. Hopefully not too many examples, but yeah, definitely understand how that needs to be done. Rob, with that very, very super heroic background that I'm very, very envious of, how do CIOs, or how should CIOs keep track of AI that is already at work across organizations? And is unauthorized AI more of an issue, within an enterprise than, say, unauthorized apps or devices that might be in the system?
This is a great question. Appreciate you asking. So, both Carl and Mike, leaned into this a little bit. When you're talking about an organization trying to measure the risks associated with AI, there's also an equal risk of not rapidly implementing AI as well to remain as competitive as possible, not only in implementing higher performance, cheaper models, but also empowering your workforce. In many cases, you would not have to do as many new jobs, requests out there, new FTEs. You might be able to take a single employee and increase their productivity by 70%, and you do this across the board. The hard part is, as Mike and Carl were really highlighting, is where does our data go? Using these tools doesn't increase overall risk. So when you have employees that are put in a position where they're signing documents that there's this almost this stringent, almost fear setting that comes into play, it does lean into a lot of the employees start using what is called shadow AI, meaning that no one really knows what they're doing. It's not logged. It is outside the scope and visibility of most of the managers and even part of the executive teams. It's not exactly what is hoped for when you're setting policies in place. And it's kind of an interesting dichotomy to sit in. Is you want to encourage employees to experiment completely. It is going to help the business out. You want to do it in a way that they're thoughtful. But in many cases, this is not a new problem. Data that you end up having, before AI was there. How do you prevent people from uploading financial data PAI to Google Docs? How are you not sending it through your Yahoo and Gmail? Uploading it to an insecure Dropbox or OneDrive somewhere. These are the things that I think most organizations have. What about your personal devices that end up having a plethora of data from the organization? Suddenly AI comes in, and it feels like everyone is asking the same questions about the same problem again, but they haven't even locked down the previous problem. So when you end up trying to balance the two, you really need to go back and say, hey, nothing has really changed. We now have a new technology. We want to make sure everyone nodding north and south that this, even though it's a new technology, the rules haven't changed. Don't be stupid with our data. When you end up leaning into that technology and saying, we would like you to explore, because I don't know someone in finance's workflow. I don't know y'all's workflow. So I can't put this in a research department saying, hey, figure out the tools that someone in HR is going to need to use to make their jobs easier and better and more efficient. We need someone in HR doing that. So empowering them a little bit so they're not having to use it secretly is a balance between that and how do we potentially leverage AI in a way that is secure. This problem is not being solved, but I'm on leaning in on the side that organizations that are limiting it too much are becoming non-competitive, and will start to feel that as other companies who are really leaning in on AI for their employees will start to break away and be the leading institutions out there. And you can't have that to remain competitive. You need to figure out what the balance is, and you need to lean forward to empower your employees to start playing with, I ain't saying playing with, but utilizing AI in their day jobs. So it's not this secret thing that they're doing behind the scenes. And plus it helps the organization kind of keep track of what everyone's doing if you're upfront about what you're doing.
If I may, I totally agree, Rob. That's what I was saying about I need to enable but balance the business risk. As you say, it's not the data discovery and data is not a new issue. If you look at Salesforce and OneDrive and there's massive amounts of organizations' data there. One of the challenges I find with AI is the entitlements, though. So we normally have kind of silos of data, I would call it. Whereas, some of the examples that we've seen is, I won't say the entire business data goes into an AI model, but now Carl, who doesn't normally have access to, I don't know, payroll information, now by querying the AI, I need guardrails there to maintain the entitlements, even though the AI knows the answer and the models know the answer, right? So it does bring new challenges in the data side that I really feel weren't there before. But that's why we see some great startups in the cyberspace around the AI use and discovery in the data, as well as the entitlements, right? And that's, hate to say it, that's usually the cycle. The new technology comes along, and then the cyber startups kind of weigh in to build in those kind of security controls and guardrails until it's actually embedded into the technology itself.
I'll just throw in a quick anecdote here. What I'm finding is that there are not enough senior leaders and executives that are knowledgeable about AI to be able to make these business decisions in a way that is going to balance the risk.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how you guys feel about that, but it's that you turn to that really understands what AI is, implications, workflow, the models, what it all means. I think it's a challenge right now.
I've seen legal organizations that essentially ban all use of AI unless they get to review it, and all that does is cripple the organization or force people into the shadows. And basically, you're not trusting, you're not educating folks. To Carl's point, there is a knowledge management beyond just the data management, and there's not really strong role-based access controls within these spaces, and that's where you actually have to rely upon the individual and monitoring. At the end of the day, I think this is almost impossible to catch ahead of time, because sometimes the behavior is emergent. You don't even know what's going to happen because of the way the LLMs are made, and you just have to be able to have folks aware of what they should be reporting, what they should be doing, and then also looking over their shoulder for it as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think the thing I've witnessed is when Rob, you were talking about shadow AI, that's not necessarily that they're installing something and using it. That could literally be they've got their tablet to the side, that's their tablet, and they're using it and embedding that into their decision-making process around whatever that is. Mike, especially, I know lawyers are particularly worried about AI, using historic case law and precedents and whatever that used to take a long time for them to research, and now is available in through these models. So it's just very disruptive, and I don't think that's where we are right now. From the controls that we have, they're not really built in the way that more mature technology is, and to be honest, that's something that we've seen, or I've seen throughout my entire career. So I think that's just where we are right now.
It feels a lot like the early internet before all the controls were in place. And,
yeah,
it's fun. This is the Wild West. This is when you're building. This is when you're actually, developing. This is the good times. Yeah. Interesting challenges.
Yeah, definitely. The oddities of those Wild West days of the internet with people, like, well, I clicked this link, I thought it would be fine, but the idea that you're going to prevent that without at least first educating the team, and then having some kind of discussion, that's comparable things with AI. And I mean, that was like my next question. We've already kind of like dove into the next question, talking about the prevalence of AI within end user enterprises, and not just something like that. That's a tool that tech suppliers, tech providers are using. The idea that AI, how prevalent is AI, for internal operations across any type of enterprises right now, and going beyond the chatbots. Just use all of your thoughts, including going back to the shadow AI questions. Just how prevalent are we seeing AI really be at this point?
So what I have seen is it's embedded in things and people don't even know it's there.
Exactly.
There's the usual chatbots, which people realize, Claude or DeepSeek or all these other ones that basically folks can utilize. But there's also capabilities on the back end that they don't even realize is basically has an AI capability. And I think that's what it's going to end up being. It's going to be baked into things, and people don't even know it's actually there, and you're not even going to think about it. In 10 years, people talking about AI will be like us talking about like internet enabled. Like that's just sort of assumption. It's not like a new thing. Or 100 years ago, talked about electricity. It's like you don't think about this. It just becomes part of the human experience. And I think that's what's going to happen with AI more and more. It's just going to exist, and you're not even going to know it's in there.
We say that, and I think what's really interesting here is a lot of organizations are kind of they're looking at AI and they kind of are taking a slice of it as it is today. And my concern is, we basically have the power, we have the transmission lines. It is now being connected to our homes, and we're getting sockets in there, but no one can see the toaster. And that's the technology that has yet to be created. And that's the stuff that is coming. And, even with some of the capabilities that ChatGPT came out with yesterday, it's, changes marketing, overnight. These are the types of things that, the organizations need to be completely open to understanding that what we're seeing today is the velocity of the technology and implementations of this is going to be hard to have a lot of organizations wrap their head around, and they need to be leaning forward enough to be able to assess the security and be able to take a look at the risk of implementing it, because it is moving at warp speed. Star Trek analogy, beside the point, but organizations are going to be playing like the Matrix, that the bullets being shot at Neo, and you're going to be feeling like you're dodging bullets consistently because of the things you can't see over the horizon. We can't predict what those are, but they're coming, and some of them are industry killers. Some of them are going to be, completely changing what we do on our daily lives, education, finance, healthcare, and so forth. We just can't see what that is. Organizations need to buckle down and take a look at this as the most significant evolution of technology that is sitting in front of them. And the old rules will not play well, and you're potentially placing your entire organization at risk by not leaning forward enough, and also balancing, the risk of topic security. And I talk to a lot of executives about this, and I stress them out with the words, you either AI or you die. And I feel that is something that a lot of organizations need to understand, that if they don't, what accounts in 3 or 4 years our organizations may not be here. And it sounds sensationalist, but after everything I've seen at this point, I truly believe it.
No, I think it's those, you have to embrace it. I think, as Mike, you said, right, it's as transformative as the internet and electricity, but it's in its very early days. And I like your analogy there, Rob, that we can't envisage the toaster and the TV when we're putting the electricity in, right? They're future inventions. I've implemented AI within the company, one from our customer support perspective. So it transformed the quality of support that our customers are getting, providing very meaningful, much more rich, technical and customer emotion sensitive information in support tickets. From a support perspective, obviously my company is doing deep learning as a core technology, so I have a different set of challenges there. But embedding it is just the way to go. I think the interesting thing, Mike, you said about healthcare and regulators. What are the regulators going to do? Because they generally move pretty slow. Right. So how it's an interesting, coming from finance myself, about the speed of regulation and law in those industries that are especially heavily regulated versus the industries that are not. And, are we going to have a two kind of speed race here? Because obviously, ultimately things like finance and healthcare have got to work within the laws and the regulatory framework as well.
So the regulations that have come out around AI and security particularly are a bit aspirational, to put it lightly. Right. The actual enforcement of them is going to be a bit difficult. California is ahead of much of the rest of the world, particularly around like healthcare and AI models. There's an old adage from IBM, like from some presentation from the 70s, a machine can never make a decision because a machine cannot be held accountable. And we have to return to that. That's where you have to put the human in the middle. Basically, I think a lot of the regulations will force us to basically have a person that can ultimately be held accountable for these decisions, not just the AI. People can't just shift responsibility. I think that's what's going to end up being the ultimate state.
And piggybacking off of that, and actually, Mike, something you said earlier about organizations that said they wanted to see everything before they would allow it into their ecosystem. Essentially, just the vetting process. What should that look like for organizations? Or what can be done for CIOs and CISOs to feel comfortable about what is being deployed, either directly official way or at least guidance to the employees for what they might bring in or start making use of. And also what kind of concerns kind of should be part of that vetting to balance that desire to have access to innovation and these tools, but then also to feel confident that things are not like being released into the wild via AI or potentially opening up backdoors that were not intended. What should be part of that process?
I see. Basically, there's two levels to that. There's the traditional security review where you've identified their certifications and whether the organization actually has some capabilities around security. And then there's the more specific question, which I think you're asking, which is the AI aspect of it, not the larger, is the company secure that's hosting the AI? Is the actual AI model a risk or threat? A lot of organizations push for AI red teaming. And I see AI red teaming as essentially, trying to trick the Sphinx. Like you're trying to come up with like riddles to like get around these systems. And sometimes they're successful. Everybody loves those times, a Twitter chatbot gets compromised and starts saying things it's not supposed to. But it comes back to governance and education of your folks that are utilizing it. People that are actually utilizing the platform have to understand the risks. And you basically, this isn't just phishing training. This isn't something along those lines. They actually have to understand that there are potential for existential risks of loss of IP, things along those lines that they have to take active responsibility for. And then, like I said, you have governance, you have oversight, you have to make sure that people are aware that they're being watched as well, and they will self-regulate themselves. Or as Rob said, then they'll just do shadow AI.
It's always going to be difficult.
Yeah.
I think the difficulty, though, in when you implement it into business processes is the volume of change. Number one, right? This, I think, Mike, as you were saying, this is not a one and done. It's constant. And then the challenge around the bias and discrimination, right? Models have bias, and if you're embedding them into business decision processes, how do you test and make sure? Again, in a lot of the older processes that I'm aware of, you have a maker and a checker. Somebody makes a recommendation, and somebody independent of that team and unit, kind of reviews and make sure. So these, and Mike, you were saying about the IBM adage, these kind of things that we're used to, they don't work anymore. We need new approaches, and be it that in testing or adoption of AI, or is that new technologies that have yet to come along that help businesses kind of have these controls that we're used to. But it's very early days right now, and it's a very difficult challenge, I feel.
Okay. One last question on the human factor for all of you to kind of wrap this up. What kind of training or guidance have you, or have you been considering introducing, or do you think should be introduced within organizations on the use of AI? What kinds of elements should be kind of really related to the people within an organization about how they're going about to making use of the third party tools. There could be something that's grown within, but like if they're using something third party, what should be really kind of gotten across to maybe all levels of staff, or maybe key personnel in terms of guidance and training.
Here, I'll jump in. One of the things I'm finding, and there's an over-reliance in the industry for years now, specifically that you're waiting for someone else to train you. And right now, especially with AI, it's moving too fast for anyone to create training effectively. And we're not saying, SANS is not, taking a stab at this for different workflows and trying to get people to think about it correctly. But my point is that we're in an area right now that everyone needs to start that self-learning, to take it upon themselves to start studying it on their own on a daily basis. And I think it's crucial that this is from executives, senior leaders on down. There is no clear book. There is no accepted, overall industry-wide, here's what everyone should do, because day to day, there's something new that's out there, and it's going to require new thought. How agentic is being examined, how when you end up taking a look at reasoning models that are now in place, what do those mean? How is that going to change things? What about the data that you're ingesting in this stuff? It's going to take people focusing and training themselves. And there's this mantra that I'm putting forward out there in order to stay healthy in the industry and yourself is you prioritize sleep, diet, exercise, and the fourth one is now AI. Meaning that on a daily basis, you need to pick up a book, listen to a podcast, look at the TLDR AI stuff that's coming out, and spend a little bit of time on AI education every day because it's moving that fast.
Carl, Mike, any final thoughts on that?
No, I think, I agree with it. It's moving really fast, right? So perfection is the enemy of progress. So, normally we, if you think of training and awareness, everything's buttoned up and everything's nice. And, no, you can't do that, right? So it's a very different approach. And I think as we've touched on throughout this, if I'm talking to the CEO or the CFO, it's a slightly different conversation because it's more around business risk, business process, and what's happening to their data. If I'm talking to a developer or R&D, it's obviously if they're using AI tools to generate code, do they understand the code, and what does that mean in the future? Right? Because they didn't write it and therefore maybe they don't understand it. That's actually not an old problem because of, a developer writing code and then a new developer comes, they've got to reread and whatever. But depending on the areas, I think there's slightly different, to Rob's point, to get the message across, the context matters to who you're talking to. but you can't wait. There is no book, as Rob's saying, right? Like, it's constantly changing. So don't wait for perfection, right? Just start getting that message out to to your employees.
I would just add, it's AI is an accelerant. It's makes everything go faster, but you still need to understand what you're doing with it. Otherwise, there's over reliance upon it. There's hallucinations, things along those lines. What it does is it really amplifies Dunning-Kruger. So if you don't know enough to not know what it's saying is wrong, you're not going to get the good benefits from it that you expect. You have to understand it. You have to understand basically the subject matter that it's working with. But the benefit it provides is beyond measure compared to the actual risk. And folks have to basically like lean into that and actually understand that. It makes everybody into a 10x engineer.
Gotcha. Well, I hope this conversation hope folks understand, that risk and put that in context for their organizations. Okay, great. This has been great. Rob, Carl, Mike, you've been fantastic. I appreciate you coming on the show today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You can find the DOS Won't Hunt podcast on Podbean, Spotify, and other popular podcast platforms.